Hello, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mildred. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And so, just so that we can get an understanding of what we're doing, I'll start from the very foundation. So, when we say API, we mean Application Programming Interface. And what it does is when you have several systems, so let's say we have the health management information system that is used, we have a pharmacy system, the lab system, and maybe there's a different billing system also. And you want a way where these systems communicate, or one system requests information from another system without having to log into the other system to get information. And so we build something we call an API to be that contract between the systems. For the ECBS, we have an API that is built to allow other systems to request data from the system. Now, we did things a little different so that we want to have an API dashboard also, where external partners can just get data directly without having to log into the system once they have an API key assigned to them. Now, previously, we have looked at the patient management and reporting system. We have looked at the virtual training workshop portal. Now, the API starts from the patient management and reporting systems administration role. Now, when a user that is assigned administration role, when that user logs in, the user has access to two functionalities that are not permission controlled, which means that regardless of the permissions they are assigned or whether or not they are assigned any permission, once a user is assigned the administration role, the user will be able to configure the API and will be able to upload offline data. So we are looking at the API configuration first. Now, the first thing we want to do for security is to have API keys. And this is the key you want to give to external people to control access to your data. That key is what we're going to use to log into the dashboard, or other systems are going to use to communicate with the system. Generate API keys link here will allow the user to just click on a button to generate API key. It is a 16 alphanumeric code that the system generates automatically, and this is the key that other systems will need to be able to access data on the system. And other users also, if you give access to the dashboard, they will need the API key to serve like their password to be able to access different things. Once we click on this button and OK, it gives us new keys. So we have several keys we want to use. Within the countries, you can decide what key you want to use for what functionality. You want to decide if you want to use one key for several people having the same keys for different expiry dates, or you want to have one key per person or one key per system. And so these are the things you decide in country yourself, how you want to allocate your keys to different people. So the first step is to generate the key. We have different keys here that we can use. Now, once we have the key, you want to grant API keys. But before you grant keys, you have to have people request for key. So let's say, for instance, you have another organization who you share data with, and this organization requires an API key to be able to get data from the ECBS system or to be able to log into the dashboard of the API. That organization, or the name of the system that wants to link, we will call, for the purpose of this system, the partner. Now, once a request is made, so if we come back here, let me log out first, and we see API login. When you click on this, it just takes you to the API dashboard. And on this dashboard, we can't access anything apart from documentation. The only thing that can be accessed here now is to request a key for clients that do not have a key yet. And so once you click on that, it gives you access. It sends a message, first of all, to the administrator to generate an API key for you, and then assigns you a key with a certain expiry date. So let's try. So let's say we have an organization named, let's say, Data Group, and we'll put an email address for Data Group, let's say, and then the reason for key, let's say we just want to test and request. So this is going to go over for the administrator of ECBS to see this request and assign a key. So once that key is assigned, then an email can be sent to that partner with their email address and the key that has been assigned to them. So when we go back to ECBS and log in, we can now grant API keys and we'll see that name of partner that requested on the drop-down menu. So they have to request a key before you can grant a key. So the pattern is you can't just give a key to somebody via email or word of mouth. The person has to go to the dashboard, and for all the countries we need to have a domain for the API. So maybe api.ecbs.dominica.gov.dm, something like that. I'll send a request for the domain for the API or the subdomain for the API to be created. So now we'll select that partner, then we choose a key, and this is from the list of keys that have been generated but not yet assigned. And so we select a key and set an expiry date. So if you have, let's say, a technical partner and your contract with that partner is for 1 year, you want to protect your data, or you don't want your data all over the place, although this data does not reveal information apart from information from the reporting indicator already aggregated. So you set an expiry date. So let's say we want 1 year from now. We can make it November 2025. But always remember that once the key is expired, they can no longer access this the API dashboard, and their systems can no longer communicate once the set expiry date is there. And the reason for this is just for control and security. So you can decide to make it 10 years from now, but take note that you have to know the set expiry date. If you have a rule that you want everything to expire every 3 months and then you renew, just for you to be able to have control of who has access to your data, then that is why there's no option of never expires. So we don't just set things and leave it running automatically. So let me set it to 1 year, and then I will assign this key. So the key has been granted. So when I come here and I look at assign keys, I can see that this organization was assigned this API key and it expires on a certain date. So until they request a key or they send a message that they can no longer access the API, or you need to renew everybody's key, this is where you find a list of all the keys that have been assigned. Then we want to look at keys requests. So when they send a request, this is where you see all of the list of requests that was sent from the API dashboard. And you see the status if this has been assigned, and we just assigned a key to this, and then the ones that are not assigned is still pending. And so the administrator now has the control of deciding who to assign to, if there's any layer of approval that is needed, and they know the reason or the limit of use for that organization, and the status is there. So every time you want to link your systems, so the organization doesn't have to be like an organization, it can be a system name. So let's say you have your pharmacy information system, then the organization name will be pharmacy information system requesting an API key. The API key is what that system will use as the identity to request data from the ECBS system, and look at it like a password, like you are having a password to log into a system. That is what it is. Okay, anybody with question? So I'll just go over again. We said that we have different systems and different systems within the countries that we use to collect information within the healthcare system, and sometimes it gets chaotic to log into multiple systems for information, and sometimes again information in one system is needed in another system in order not to repeat, and in order to have a pool of information about a particular client from all systems in one place. And so because of all of this, we need something we call an API. Now the API we are building is custom to the ECBS system, and it allows other systems to be able to request information from the ECBS system. It is one way. The ECBS has no knowledge of the other systems and will not request information from any other system. This API does not work with any standard as it regards to the systems within the country or other different softwares. It just has its own standard, and we use a defined set of protocols. We use the RESTful protocol to define the route and the URLs. And when we say RESTful, we just mean REST, which means representational state transfer. And all it does is just defines how the API connects to the internet and how it communicates the information. So what you need to understand about API is that these things are not, there's no central control. It's like they're all decoupled from each other. So the system, so you can add new things. The system can grow, it can evolve over time. And once you want to add new things, you can add more abstraction layers, and all of these layers now makes it easy for different parts different deep coupled parts to work together as one part. So that's basically all we're trying to achieve here with the API. So we did things a little different just so that we can have two ways of accessing records. One of the way we're going to look at today, and the other when we try to get our hands dirty tomorrow to see how we can request data between two systems. So once an API key is granted to a system or to a different partner or another partner, then they can now use this key in their configuration to be able to exchange data. And so we're going to look at that part tomorrow, but now we'll go back to the API to look at what the dashboard looks like before we look at the configuration part of it.
So, military question.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So, using this key, other systems will be able to access data from the electronic case-based surveillance. And does it operate two-way? Does it mean that we can access data from other systems? Also?
No, it's one way. So other system can access from ECBS, but ECBS have no knowledge of those systems.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, all right.
Would there be a way to link this to another system?
Yes, there's a way, but this consultancy only is only for a one-way system, and the reason is this: it's easier to work with ECBS as we have proprietary control over it and the source code. So create an API for other systems to be able to request data from ECBS. But now the other systems are different across countries, different standard, different protocols. That's a different type of consultancy where there has to be knowledge about what that system is, who the vendors are, if the countries have proprietary rights to edit the source code to be able to maybe create API, look at how the database and different things are structured to be able to have that layer for ECBS to be able to call information. Now, this call of information from system uses something we call an endpoint. If the endpoints are not defined in the other systems, or you don't know how it is defined, there's no way you can call it. And so that's why it is one way. And so the other part of ECBS requesting from other systems is a different level of government projects or systems. But that can be done. It is not difficult. It's just a different kind of consultancy to do those kind of jobs.
Okay.
Okay, so this actually brings us to the topic, the routes and the endpoints. So you always hear something route and you hear endpoints all the time. And sometimes people use them interchangeably, but they don't really mean the same thing. When we talk about a route, it just means a URL, and we use that to identify an endpoint. When you talk about an endpoint, then it has a method. Now, before I go deeper, there is something we call HTTP. And I'm sure all of you have heard about HTTP most of the time, but it means Hypertext Transfer Protocol, and it's just an application layer protocol that is, so the primary purpose is just to transfer information between network devices, and it runs on other layers we're not going to look at, other layers of the network protocol stack. But the HTTP is the protocol that we actually use for this endpoint. The methods that it has are get, post, put, delete, option, patch. But for this, we're going to use only get and post method. Now, when you use a get method, it expects that you want an information back in return, and post means you're just sending information. When I fill a form and I click submit, I'm posting information, I'm sending information. When I enter a unique ID and I want to retrieve a client record, I am getting information. Now, this method is very important, the get and the post method, in the context of this API that we are going to use. Whenever we have a URL. I'll give you an example. This is the whole api.cbs5.mediagroup.com is the site. Now the endpoint is now v1/clients/endpoint. This is the route where we have to go to. Now when we combine this route with the method get, then it becomes an endpoint. So you see why it's easy to use it interchangeably. And I'm going to switch my screen for us to look at this better. Now this is the code that runs the endpoint. When we define endpoints, we put a /. So when you get to the domain, /what will get you to that page. The API is versioned so that if there is addition to the system or the database structure changes or there's a major change that might break the flow of data or the whole API, then it can be done in different versions so that users can continue using a particular version before the new version is released. So now all of the files that control all the functionalities are in a particular version folder. And if we want to change from version 1 to version 2, we just create all the functionalities in a new folder we call version 2. Now, because the version is version 1, and then we have another folder called clients that has all of the files that we need to define the routes and the endpoints. Now, the / just means this is the home page. When it comes to the home page, this is what you do. When you get to the register page, this is what you will do. And then when you get to the test page, this is what you will do. And so when we come to the site, I'm going to go back to the site, and I decide to change this to be v1/client. It will take me back to the page where I can request an API key, because that is the function that I defined for this endpoint /. Every time I want to get to the home page of the API, I will put the version number, which is v1, and the name of the folder that holds all of the functionality or the endpoints, then / whatever I want to put. Every time you want to look at the API to make sure that it is working well, clients can connect, you can just do //test, which is the endpoint that was defined. And when I put test, you should see a JSON response to say the connection to the API is working. This is what you always want to see when you run tests. Now, because you know the endpoint is v1/client/test, this is what you will create on your button or whatever you want on your system. If you have an system administrator dashboard where you want to have something to just test APIs every morning to make sure that everything is up and running, we're going to get our hands dirty with that tomorrow, but we just want to look at the basics and understand it before we know what we're doing tomorrow. Okay, so when you go to test, you'll see that. So all of the endpoint definition they're all going to be contained in your manuals for you to understand. Now, I want to check the health. And if you do things like for countries, I think St. Kitts that use AWS, where you can set the your alarms or whatever service you want to be able to get an email or get a notification when something has gone wrong, you can use the endpoint health, and this will tell you whether this is healthy or is working well. If you don't see this message, it means something is wrong with the API. So every time you want to do your system administrator functionality to make sure that things are working the way they're supposed to do, you want to run the health. Health is in the root. It does not have the endpoint, is just your domain name /health. But for the test, you have to go to the version, and the version is v1. And the functionalities we are looking at is clients, and then / the endpoint, which is test. Okay, and then the home page is just /, and then it gives you these parts where we can request an API key. I disabled the ability to be able to log in, and we'll do that tomorrow because I wanted to explain this before I let people to be able to do this. I remove most of the security. Okay, is there anyone with question? Okay, so do you want me to go over it again, or I should move on?
Mildred, you could go over it again, please. I'd appreciate that.
All right.
And you're saying this is a function of the system administrator and the IT person.
Yes.
It seems to be so much
Okay,
for a non-IT person.
Yes, it's actually a little bit complex, but I will provide a documentation step-by-step guide, and then on the site I will make a lot of things easy. That will just be by click of a button instead of having to write codes or anything.
Okay.
All right, so we'll go over it again, so we'll make it easier to follow. We have said that the ECBS system has 3 modules. We have the patient management and reporting system, we have the virtual training workshop portal, and then we have the API. Now, the patient management and reporting system is where we collect all of the data about from the screenings to the management of all of the diseases that we are surveilling. This patient management and reporting system has different types of users and are defined as the roles. These roles are permission controlled. Now, the administration role is the role that you assign to super user IT, the ones that configure the system. It is also the role that does everything about the API configuration. When I log in as an administrator, without any permissions assigned, or regardless of what permissions you assign, every administrator is going to have access to the API configuration drop-down menu. This drop-down menu holds 4 functionalities. One is to generate new API keys. So when you run out of keys to allocate to users or to systems, you can just come there, click on a button, and then you generate a new key. You can grant API keys to the different partners that have requested a key to be able to link their system or to be able to log into the dashboard. The way a partner requests a key is by going to the API dashboard and then filling the form to request a key. Now, when you fill the form, we talked about HTTP method get and post. When you just want to request information, you'll see that all of the method here is get. But when a form is filled, we'll now see that the method to send that form there now becomes post. So let's get that and then post. So when we are linking our systems or you're linking another system, and let's say for instance, when you get the data from the ECBS, what do you want to do with it? Is it just for viewing, or you want to post it to another system or send it to another system? That is where the knowledge of this request method comes in. So when we do that live example tomorrow and try to make 2 systems talk, you will see exactly how this method comes into play. So we have the form, an organization or a system. Let's say we have a system HMIS, and let's put an email address of the administrator, and then the reason is, let's say, production, and then we'll request. Now the request is going to be sent to the system, and the administrator will see this request and will have to assign the key. So we'll come here, and when we refresh, and we see that we now have that on the list of partners. On this system, when we say partner, we just mean any other system, any external system, external partner, agency, person, group of people that wants data from your system. So if it's a system, you can put the system name. If it's another organization that wants to be able to extract records from your system, then you put the name of the organization. But all of them, we just call them partner on the system. So you can choose that partner and choose a key to assign. Now the keys here are the keys that have not been assigned. So you only get access to keys that have not been assigned. And then you have to set an expiry date. Sometimes you have partners that are temporary. Maybe you have an organization leading something, and the organization will no longer be leading that, and you know the end date of that contract. You want to set an expiry date, or somebody will just needs it for test and needs say I'm testing for the next 1 month. I want a test API key. Then you set an expiry date. You can't set the expiry dates to never expire, and it's for security purpose, so that you can know who has access to your data, and you can deliberately grant access or revoke access as much as you want. So let's say this person will have access to the end of the year, and then assign key. Now, what is going to happen when the key expires is that system will no longer be able to request data because authentication will fail. So if you have 2 systems within the country and you want them to be able to communicate, then you need to make sure that the API key is always up to date. If you set an expiry date, maybe you, at the beginning of the year, you give expiry date to the end of the year, and you know that every January you have to set or reset the expiry date for all of them, you can just come back here and extend expiry dates. You can come here to look at all of the keys that have been assigned and who keys were assigned to, when it was assigned, and the date that these keys expire. So if there's anyone you need to extend, you will know from here. Then you can also know all the systems that have API key. In the events that you forget the API key of a particular system, you can get them back from here. Then keys request is the parts where you see all of the requests that came in for API key, and then once a key is assigned, it's going to change the status from pending to assigned here. So these are the API functionalities from the ECBS administration page. When we log out on the home page of ECBS, we have API login. This doesn't necessarily log anyone in, it just takes you directly to the dashboard. The home page of the dashboard only defines the form that we use to request a key. Tomorrow I'm going to enable the login, and we'll see how we log in and look at the different endpoints that are defined and how we can display data on this dashboard. So the goal here is that we want to use this as a surveillance dashboard and also has an API to request data all in one. So it's not going to be like the traditional API that has no interface that you just have running somewhere on the machine where you just take the endpoint and define. So this makes it easier for you to be able to visualize the data that you are extracting out of the system. Now, the configuration of this API takes a different method. We'll talk first of all about the technical part and how it was set up, and then we'll now look at what we need to do to keep the API running. And then tomorrow we'll now look deeply at the routes. So for the countries that are here without the IT personnel, I'm purposely skipping all of those technical parts that are the most important parts for linking the system until tomorrow, so that everyone can watch the introductory video and make sure that they're available tomorrow to be able to get that part understood. So the system uses Fast API, and we're going to go to the command line to work on this. So we use Fast API for the system, and we'll add our SSH into the system. Once on the system, it has already been configured, and the configuration is almost similar to the same configuration we did for the CBS5, except that in this configuration, we have to use UVCon because Python does not run on Apache web server directly. So it uses something we call an ASGI server, which comes with UVCon by default. And when we use Fast API, these all come prepackaged with the installation. Now, the root directory is the www.html directory, and here we'll find the API, which is named ECBS API. It's not yet on your systems, and so after this training, it's going to be on your system, and you'll find it the same way we are displaying. And then when I cd ECBS API, then I will get to the directory of the project. Now, the directory is like this. We have an environment file that was created on the server. You can copy and paste exactly the same environment file that you have on the ECBS system. It uses the same values. Now, the difference between this and that is that you need access to the database of the ECBS system. And so the MariaDB configuration file was set such that it allows connection from remote systems. So you can get access to the data from the database of that system. On the ENV file also, we specify all the values exactly as we have them on the ECBS environment file. I'm not going to display this for security purpose, but it's the same values that we have. And then we have a directory, ECBS API. This is a directory that holds all of the routes. Now, in this directory, we can list and see what we have here. We have the initialization file, the version file, the app file main, and then we have this folder, which is the version folder v1. So we are on version V1 that holds all of the functionalities for this version. In the future, if anything changes, database changes, there's a major breaking change, then we'll have another directory V2 so that people who are already connected to version 1, so let's say countries who hire the consultants to actually link their systems to make the communication two-way, and they are done with that, you don't want to break that setting they've already had. So you leave V1 running and you create V2 so they can choose what version they are running to get data. And they can now take their time to migrate to V2 without breaking anything. So when we look at the V1 folder, we now have all of the files that controls all the endpoints. Now I have two files, the models file and the clients file. In the events that I decide that I want to have new database tables and the API collecting information and sending to the database table, then I will define them in the models folder. But the clients folder now holds all of the functionalities for the endpoints. Here, I only defined a schema file, a utils file that just holds functions that I want to use in my routes. And I define all the routes in the initialization file so that whenever we hit this endpoint, v1/clients, and to run all of the files or all the functions in this file. So when we always have the init file, it just means that it is run automatically. You don't need to call the file. Once you get to that directory, this file is called. And that is why when we get here, v1/clients, then that file is run and we can see functionality. This functionality is at the home route that just defines a form. In the directory here, we have the home route here getting a particular form, the index form, which resides somewhere here in the templates folder, and it defines that form that we see on the page. When we render that template and we fill in the information, then it is processed by another route, which is register, and this route posts this information. So the HTTP method here is post, and then it sends this to a database table in the ECBS for the administrator to be able to see that this information was sent and this person needs an API key, or this system needs an API key. When we get to the test route, we get the response, the connection to the API is working. So every time we get this response, it just means that everything is how it's supposed to be. And then we have other routes we are going to look at tomorrow that does other things. So we call this not the route, but the endpoint. So it's used interchangeably. It's very easy for you to call route endpoint, endpoint route. Most of the time, the difference is so slim, and you won't, everybody understand what you're talking about. Does anyone have any question?
From my end.
Okay. So once we have all of this, we have Poetry, which is the dependency manager, let's say, for Python. And what we do with it is just to have all the dependencies that the project depends on specified in that file. And when we run that file, you'll find the Poetry file here. The Py project.toml has the definition of all of the dependencies for the software. So you don't have to know what you need to install on your server. You just run Poetry install, and it installs everything on this file when you get to the server. Now, because we want it to be in an environment, we created a virtual environment. And for you to run this server, you want to use UVCon. And before you can do this, you need to activate that environment. You need to be at the root, or the root of the application. So I'm going back to the root now. So we're at the root of the application, which is going to be your var www html / the name of the application. We are at the root. Once we are there, then we want to activate. And once it's activated, then we can now run this. And running this with UVCon has a specific code we can use. I'm using PM2, and I do PM2 start, then we use UVCon. The name of the application is ECBS API.main. We are looking at the app file reload, which means that anytime there's a change, just updates that file. I have installed this to listen at port 8001. Whenever you change the port you are using to run this command, you need to change your ports in your vhost file. I'll leave that in the documentation, okay? And once you do this, you get the running here. So it will tell you your system is running, and you need to see online to make sure it is running. When you see any message like this, you can follow it and write do whatever it tells you to do. So I'll do PM2 save. And then if you have an error, let's say we go to the site now, and let's say I refresh, for instance, and let's say I have an error. Let's say it gives you any system failure error, or the system is not working, an error that the system doesn't display as it's supposed to display. You can come here to run PM2 log to see what error you have. All you want to see is 200 OK as the status code, which means that everything is running fine on the system. You don't want to see anything that is not 200 OK. You want to always see that. When you see 404 not found, it just means that a particular file that we made reference to is not found there. It can result in error, but because this is just a style sheet, we don't have any problem with it. We don't have that problem here. But once you see all these kind of errors, you want to handle it and deal with it. We want to deal with the errors. And so we'll look at the practical part of that tomorrow. I want you to really understand what it is that we are, or what the API first of all means, and what it is we are trying to achieve before we do the practical, so that it will be understood by everyone. So does anyone have any question?
Not from me.
So one of the requests I'll put out today in an email is we need another subdomain, which will be api.your current domain. So for, let's see, which IT we have, IT here, Dominica IT, we have IT from Dominica here. So we have Dominica's site was ecbs.dominica.gov.dm. So if we get another subdomain like api.ecbs.dominica.gov.dm, so maybe, or api.ecbs, so that I will know the API for what system it is. I will send out the email to see if I get that, then you now find this on your system. For now, you can see you don't have the API on your system because I've not updated that. But once I get the domain, I will make that update. All right. So does anyone have any question? All right. I will get these recordings out early enough for you to be able to rewatch, and then I will send out requests. I don't want to go further than this for today because the only one IT staff is here, and I don't want to do the most important part, which is that practical part, without everyone here to understand it, because if we do that today, they'll get lost tomorrow. So try to remind your participants in your country to be here tomorrow. It's 10 a.m. Eastern time, which will be 11 a.m. in, I think, most of the island. It's going to be 11 a.m. And we'll try to keep it within 2 hours. Tomorrow might be longer, since a lot of today's agenda will be pushed to tomorrow to enable everyone participate. All right?
All right.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, dear.
Yeah, bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.